Welcome to the CommunicationDiva podcast, episode 27. In this week's podcast, the CommunicationDiva continues her exploration of communication styles. This week, the Aggressive Communicator. What aggressive communication looks like, how it is used, and how to manage yourself when you're confronted with it. So pay attention, listener. You're going to want to know this stuff when some rude, overbearing bully decides to take advantage of you, you disgusting, pathetic excuse for it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to CommunicationDiva. This is Jenn Swanson, and this is episode number 27. And I am glad to be with you today. I'm recording very early in the morning here before people get up. And I am talking to you today about the Aggressive Communicator. And I just want to talk, I'm not going to talk about serious workplace bullying or anything that is abusive at this point. I just want to talk about people whose behavioral styles tend to be the default of the aggressive style. Last time we spoke about the passive or the non-assertive person. And this time we're talking about the aggressive, and next time we'll be talking about what it looks like to be assertive and how to become more assertive. So we're doing a bit of a series here. And the idea with this is to be able to recognize somebody whose default is aggressive. That might not be too difficult to recognize. But as I said in the last episode, in episode 26, we all have the tendency to be some of all three. So there are times when you might be passive. There are times and people with whom you might be more aggressive. And then there are times when assertiveness will come naturally. So it's not to say that anyone is always using one particular behavioral style, but we usually have a default. And sometimes people trigger us. Sometimes we are triggered by the people we are with at the time or the situations. So let's take a look at aggressive behavior. And some of the signs and symptoms include yelling a lot, being very loud, sarcasm is a big one, intimidating other people, being a negative person, and being negative more often than positive. You know, life is horrible, glass is half empty. There's always a tragedy at hand or a catastrophe. Anger, being very angry. Controlling, being in control, having to be in control, having to be in charge of situations. Overbearing. Being overbearing is often a sign of aggression. Competitive, extremely competitive. Having to win at all costs. Needing to be right. Needing to be heard. And needing to have the last word. A person who is aggressive makes choices for other people, regardless of whether or not they want them to. Makes decisions. Being defensive. Using humiliation tactics, humiliating other people, being hurtful to other people, belittling other people, and accusing other people or labeling them with names, putting them down in order to make themselves look good. Those are all signs and symptoms of aggressive behavior. I'll just tell you a little story here about a friend of mine who I love dearly, but defaults to the aggressive side. And another person I know who seemed to be more passive. And the two of them had never met. And one was visiting from Ireland. And the other one lives here where I live. And we ended up going to a pub, and we went to an Irish pub just to see if the one who was from Ireland thought it was authentic or not. And while there, the one person who is quite passive had met the aggressive person for the first time. And the aggressive person, we were looking to see what people were going to have to order as a drink. And the aggressive person looked at the passive person and said, "Have you ever had a Long Island iced tea?" And the passive person said, "No, I don't think I have." And the aggressive person said, "Good, you're having one," and ordered for her. Now, this is somebody who had never met this person before, who has no idea what her likes and dislikes are, and she was doing it in a friendly way. But that was a pretty aggressive move. I would never presume to do that to somebody I'd never met before. And in the end, of course, after a couple of Long Island iced teas, everyone was having a great time. But it was pretty funny for me to sit back and watch this little interaction happen and to observe the different behavioral styles in these people that I know. So aggression and how it's used. And there are all sorts of reasons why somebody might be behaving in an aggressive manner, but these are some of them. To be in control, to control other people, to have things go the way that person wants them to go. Sometimes it's to boost self-esteem. Often people who are aggressive have very low self-esteem, even though that's hard to tell, because they're forever putting themselves up, talking wonderfully about themselves, boosting their own self-esteem and putting other people down. Aggression can be used as an outlet for something else. Something else is happening to that person in their life or has happened to them in their life, and they're getting their own back. They're burning off steam. They're getting out some kind of frustration, and sometimes that will come out as aggression. Sometimes it's a learned thing, a learned behavior. Family history might be that the person grows up in an aggressive environment, and this is a learned way of communicating by yelling. There are some families that are very loud, and they argue with each other constantly, and it can be a bit of a shock for somebody who isn't used to that. Mental illness might be a contributing factor. Substance abuse maybe as well. And power dynamic. Sometimes it's just a case of, I'm going to show you who is in charge here. And in some cases, again, as I said before, a certain amount of aggression can be not a bad thing, but it depends on how this behavior is exhibited in the end. You know, things like road rage, things like workplace bullying, or bullying, oh, excuse me, I'm yawning here, or bullying of any kind, and threatening behavior, abuse. None of that is healthy or helpful or a good thing. But there are times when being a little bit more aggressive in getting things done or getting things, to happen quickly, is not necessarily a bad thing. So what do you do if you have to work with somebody or communicate with somebody who defaults to this behavioral style, and that style is not your own? How do you manage? So here are a few ideas on how to deal with somebody whose behavioral style is the aggressive one. Very rarely, this kind of thing, the aggressive behavior, has anything to do with you. So if you can try to look at the behavior of the person as separate from the person themselves, separate the behavior from the value of the person, and look at how they're behaving rather than what kind of person they are, that can be a helpful tactic. And using curiosity. Curiosity is a wonderful tool. It's hard to do, but with practice, it does get easier. Most of the time, the aggression is coming from something going on within the other person, And again, doesn't have anything to do with you except that you happen to be in the path of it. I know that working at a desk in the hospital, working as a nursing unit clerk for many years, I encountered a number of people who were stressed out, scared, upset with some situation that was going on with their loved one, and would come to the desk and be very angry and aggressive. And at first I took it personally, and then realized very quickly that it had absolutely nothing to do with me. I was the poor sap sitting in the uniform at the desk who got hollered at or yelled at or whatever the case may be. This was particularly intense when I worked in places like intensive care or emergency or palliative care, where people were in dire straits, bad things were happening, and often there were no answers and no solutions. And it was a case of the person being frustrated, being upset that something horrible was happening to their loved one, and the aggressive behavior came out. It was an outlet for something else. And sometimes, unfortunately, I was the one at the desk. What I wouldn't allow would be things like being threatened, being sworn at. If someone was coming to me, pounding the desk and calling me names, I would say something like, I am very happy to help you, but I'm not going to help you if you continue to speak to me this way. Because there were other people around, and I wanted to maintain professionalism. And the other thing too is that you want to maintain a certain amount of self-respect, and an assertive response would be something like, I am more than happy to help you, but I'm not going to help you if you continue to speak to me this way. If you want to speak more quietly, then I can help you. Now, returning aggression with aggression just usually doesn't go well, especially in a workplace setting. So I would try and talk more softly. I would try and speak very slowly. Sometimes I would stand up so that the power dynamic was more even, so that the person wasn't leaning over the desk at me. I would stand up and get my body language aligned with the other person, and I would not cross my arms in a defensive manner at all. I would open my arms, be open, be receptive, and I would listen. And that was really useful. So often what is happening with somebody who is exhibiting aggression like this is that they have a need that is being unmet. So there is some need of theirs that is not being met. They have a need for safety. They have a need for security. They have a need to know that their family member is going to be okay. Maybe they haven't eaten all day and they're hungry. I've had patients come to the desk freaking out because of something or another, and it turns out they missed their food, or they're medicated. And again, often it's very, very, very true that this has nothing to do with you. Another thing to do when dealing with someone who is aggressive is to use objective words when communicating with them rather than judgment words. So, for example, you could say something is like, what I see is that you're angry. Is there something I can help with? Which is better than, you're in a really bad mood. What's your problem? So try to be objective, and again, separate the behavior from the person themselves. So instead of saying, wow, you're really annoying, you could say something like, I see you're frustrated, or you seem to be frustrated. What's going on? Try to remain calm, but responsive. Be responsive, and try and engage with the other person. And sometimes all you can do is listen. And sometimes really good active listening would be a key to allowing the other person to vent their frustration. And sometimes if you're calmly listening, quietly listening, actively listening, then the anger gets diffused and the aggression calms down. Another thing to do is to keep an open mind. We see life through our own lens, and sometimes we have a really hard time seeing other perspectives and other points of view. So what might be true for us is not always true for the other person, as shocking as that may sound, and it works the other way as well. So sometimes the things that we think about and the beliefs that we have and the values that we have are just not matching up with those of the other person. And sometimes that can bring on some aggressive behavior. Now, this doesn't mean that we should ignore hurtful or dangerous behavior, but it does mean sometimes giving up our need to be right or to win at all costs, or, to be absolutely convinced that ours is the only way. And an aggressive person won't respond well to jumping up and down and saying, no, I'm right, you're wrong. It takes sometimes more creativity than that and an open mind to come up with some possible solutions. There are ways of being collaborative that can be helpful, and there are ways of using very good assertive skills, and we'll talk about that a bit more next week, in handling this kind of behavior. So working on your assertive skills, I mentioned that just now. And some aggressive people know who they can push around. And some aggressive people who tend to bully other people, can really somehow sniff out the passive or non-assertive people and pounce on them. I worked with a boss once, a head nurse, who was very, very good at that. If you showed any signs of weakness, she would push and she would jump and she would be so mean. But if you stood up for yourself and you were assertive at all, she developed a respect for you. And I asked her about it at one point, and she said, I'm testing them to see if they can handle things. She was very, very aggressive. And I felt really sorry for people who were unable to stand up for themselves assertively, for people who were passive, because she would run right over them and have them in tears. And completely mean and unnecessary, and making herself feel powerful and feel very good by making the other person feel very low and very awful. And there are people like that, and that was very bullying behavior. And she was someone in a management position, which was a real challenge to deal with. I was able to use a lot of humor. I was able to stand my ground at times. I was able to gain her respect somehow through trial and error, and not dissolve in a puddle of tears, to develop some assertive skills. And that stood me well, because she was, again, a very challenging person to work with. Another thing to think about is your own behavior and how it might be contributing to the aggressive behavior. Sometimes when we can't figure out how to change someone else, which you actually can't because you're responsible for your own behavior, what you can do is to figure out how you are reacting to this person and how you might act rather than react. How can you do things differently if you know what you're doing right now is just not working when dealing with this other person? Are there things that you know that trigger this other person that you could avoid? Are there ways that you could approach this person that might be more effective than what it is you're doing now? So sometimes it's a matter of figuring out what the other person's need is and trying to work around that. I remember having a student who came to me once very frustrated. She was on her practicum, or her clinical experience in the hospital, and I was the supervising instructor. And she was having a very frustrating time because she was working with a preceptor who was an instructor at another institution, who kept drilling her and quizzing her and saying, well, not answering any questions. And the student would ask a question and the preceptor would say, well, you tell me the answer. You should know all of this. And I think what was happening from my, stepping back and taking a look at the situation was that the instructor was feeling, or the preceptor, who was an instructor somewhere else, was feeling threatened by this very competent, young, intelligent student. So I sat the student down and we had a long conversation about communication skills. And I said, I think that this person is feeling threatened, and the aggressive response that you're getting is a defense mechanism. What was happening was the person was feeling like this younger person was going to show her up at work and show some of her mistakes and some of her faults, because the student had come in with all sorts of knowledge, was extremely competent and professional in the way she handled things, and the preceptor was feeling threatened. And so one of my suggestions was this: maybe the instructor, the preceptor, who happened to be an instructor, needed to feel valued and needed to feel important. And so my suggestion to the student, and I didn't want her to do this in a fake way, but was to give some credit where credit was due, to say something to the instructor assertively that would sound something like, I'm brand new at this. I have a lot of school under my belt, but I don't have any hands-on experience. I know that you've been doing this for the past 10 years and that you're a teacher, and I'd really like to pick your brains a little bit and learn from some of the wisdom that you have gathered over all these years that you've been doing this job. And I thought, yeah, it might sound a little bit like brown-nosing, but if you can do it in a way that was not sounding cheesy, I think what you would communicate to the other person is that you do want to learn from them, you value their experience, and the other person needed to feel that they were, that they had something of value to offer to the student, because I really feel that's what was going on. And so the student really thought, and we practiced and worked on some things that she might say. And she went back and she had to be courageous, and she had to take the first initial step in breaking this pattern of awful communication that had been set for a couple of days in by this point. And this is a couple days into a 7-week practicum. And so, it needed to go well, not the way it was going at that time. So she did. She went in and she used some of the words that we practiced with. And I think the defenses came down and the aggression stopped being so strong. And the person who was the preceptor opened up and began to really see herself as a coach and a teacher, and felt respected and felt that she had something to contribute to the learning experience of the student. And the whole thing went so much better than it had begun because of how threatened this person felt. So it sometimes figuring out how your own behavior might be contributing can make the world of difference. And if you can figure out what is going on for the other person and how you can navigate that strategically, then things can go much better. Sometimes there's nothing you can do without help or intervention. And this is, this can be true if it's more than just an aggressive communication style you're dealing with. Again, as I said before, if you're feeling threatened or afraid, you might need to seek help from an employee assistance program, from higher management, from a counselor, or even in some extreme cases, consider changing jobs, which is a major thing. But workplace bullying is real and it's rampant. And I hope to cover that topic in greater detail and get somebody in who can speak to that with some experience and some expertise in a future episode. I understand that there was a website in our local area that was run by a couple of volunteer women who were counselors and who did, had day jobs and ran this workplace bullying website. And the website actually crashed a couple of times because it was so overwhelmed with people needing help, wanting to tell stories, having questions, and wanting to know where to find resources. And after a while, it was becoming pretty much an 8-hour job when these two women got home from their day jobs. And because they hadn't figured out how to gain any income or do anything to make any money doing this, there was no support for the hours and hours of work they were putting in. They had to end up shutting it down. So I know that it's a problem out there. I know that it's scary and challenging and exhausting for a lot of people. And I'd really like to explore that in a future episode. But for now, I hope that you have gained some value from learning a little bit more about the aggressive communicator, that you will be able to recognize some of the signs and some of the symptoms of this, and have a little bit more understanding and maybe a few tools and ideas on how to navigate somebody who is defaulting to this particular behavioral style. Next week, we will talk about assertive skills and how to become more assertive, ways to practice. If you're a very shy person, we'll be talking about some ways to overcome your shyness. And so I hope that you will come to the website, www.com. No, I'm still half asleep here. www.CommunicationDiva.com. And come and say hello. Come and click on the comment section and leave a comment. Follow me on Twitter. Come to Facebook and say hello. And just let me know who you are and where you are in the world. And if you have any questions or comments or insights on any of the topics that we talk about here at Communication Diva. Many thanks. I hope you have a wonderful week. And we'll connect with you soon.